Hemmendinger is a graduate student here in the School of Journalism, and he recently went through all of the INN numbers and did a survey of how they're currently funded. And so I just thought it might be good to start things out with a little overview of where we're at, and maybe it'll confirm a little bit of what Kevin was just saying about the perhaps over-dependence currently on foundation funding. So Matt, you want to get started, and I guess I'll just move slides ahead for you.
Yeah, please. Everybody, if you'll look here, I added the link to this presentation in case there was any weird issues with not being able to see it, not functioning properly or whatever. Everybody can follow that link. More importantly, there's a lot of hyperlinks within the presentation that I'd encourage you to check out, because and this is a presentation of ideas, this is the overview. It's not going to be in depth. I talked with Laura Frank on the phone, and she said, wait a second. That's what I'm going to talk about. And as we look through the whole schedule for the presentation, we realized there's going to be a lot of repeated points, but from some different perspectives, and I think everybody's going to have a different idea. So moving along, Steve, thank you again for this opportunity to speak. Thank you for bringing in Kevin and for coordinating all this. I'd like to start by saying the research was very encouraging. I'm looking across all the different INN networks. There's a ton of good reporting out there. There's a lot of good content to work with. And it almost seems to me like if you combined it as a national, I think you'd be right there on par with any of the major well-known investigative news sources that people currently turn to. So I'm very encouraged. I think there's a lot of potential to work with. So here's an overview of what we're going to be talking about. Laura refers to her plan sort of as the four-legged stool to begin an INN news network. And if you count there, the stool is evolving, and it's possibly bringing on a footrest or maybe a couple or something else, and gaining more and more legs to the stool as it goes. And Laura's going to expand upon that more. But yeah, as Steve said, there's foundations that everybody should be fairly familiar with that are working incredibly well, providing a lot of support, and they're a great way to get off the ground. We have donations, both big and small, large people bequeathing, full states, people giving $1 or $2 at a time. There's a lot of new interesting tools for underwriting, utilizing the power of the internet and the reach of being able to reach out to anybody who's plugged in. And I'd like to talk a lot about those. There's some advertising models that haven't fully been reinvented, but are certainly trying new perspectives and new approaches to it. And then also, a lot of the INN networks, they're working with local publications and universities and doing a tremendous job of utilizing and developing new talent, while at the same time helping distribute their product and utilize some new assets. And then the final one that Laura, I think, is going to get into a lot more detail on is the products and services, and some of the new ways that being more than just presenting a timely news story, being able to be a resource for databases, being a training center. So go ahead, Steve. Foundations, I think, are a great way to get off the ground. I guess the first question I would have is, do you go to the foundations first and try and get some seed money, or do you produce some journalism first? I was speaking with Iowa Watch director Steve Berry, and he was talking about, well, that was our question. Do we get off the ground on our own and then prove to them, hey, look, we've produced this story, this story, this story, this is why you should fund us? Or do you find the funding first and then use that to fund the stories? And that was a big question. I have listed here some of the main national funders. There's plenty of people out there looking to invest in high-quality journalism. I think the biggest thing I would encourage, though, is to not become overly reliant upon them and find a way to diversify the revenue streams.
So Matt, as you were going through the list of 51 INN members plus others, did you get a sense of how dependent a lot of them were? Were you seeing a lot of other revenue streams that you have on your list?
There's a variety. There wasn't a consistent model of everybody listing foundations or everybody listing donations. There was a wide variety across all the sites. I did not get an overwhelming feeling that people were overly dependent. I did not get any, there was no clue saying everybody's reliant, this is the only source. No, there was nothing like that, but certainly these are a very important aspect. of the funding, and I think it's certainly an important revenue source. Does that answer your question halfway?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're hoping that this will really kind of set up for what the existing state is and what we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it seems like foundations are certainly being utilized very well. Going online, there's a lot of new donation services. A lot of people were using PayPal especially. Amazon was getting some traffic. The two other ones that were geared more towards nonprofits were Razoo and Network for Good. Razoo is being used by INN member, the Minnesota Post or MinPost, non-INN member but very similar in the nonprofit news model. Oakland Local is also using Razoo, and it's a site that they were developed to be the PayPal of nonprofits. They saw how much PayPal was charging for their fees, and they said, this isn't right. If people are doing nonprofit work and trying to provide a charitable service, why are we, a processing firm, taking out our share? Now, if you go and look at Razoo and PayPal's rates, you'll notice they're both 2.9%. So hopefully I think that's a sign of PayPal having dropped it in the recent years. Amazon can also, there was a couple sites that incorporated Amazon also, and that can bring in or take off another 5%, and we'll talk more about that, of how to be careful. But my question was, there's a lot of INN members that were using their own processing services, that they had it embedded within their own site, that I did not see a link moving you back to PayPal or moving you back to Amazon. And my question is, if one INN member can do this, what would it take to help transfer that across the rest of the INN network and help replicate a service that's already been produced by one, put that to use for all of the INN networks? Go ahead, Steve. And I think, one final point on the last slide. I noticed that some of the websites, some of the INN members didn't have an ask at all. There was nothing. There was no request whatsoever for funding, and I thought at the very least you could at least have some option, even if it's as simple as a small box saying donate now or donate, support us. The least you can do is ask, because there was a lot of sites that it seemed like their ask wasn't one of compelling you and pulling on the heartstrings. It was much more of an expectation. If this person is looking to donate, I'm providing the avenue, and I think the best thing we can do is provide those avenues and always make sure that there is an option. So now moving forward, here are a list of all the way, or many of the ways you can utilize the internet to fund your service. Here we have general startups. These are geared towards everything from I want to sell t-shirts to I want to produce news. You can use these sites for any business that you want to get off the ground and reach out to people and ask anyone that's interested in your product or what you're doing to fund you. Spot Us and Emphasis are geared towards investigative journalism. They are made for producing journalism, for producing content. And then finally over here in the post-publication, Kachingle, Flatter, and Think This are new models that are trying to look at the microfunding, and that if you'll see a Think This or a Flatter button on an article, and you like that article and you said, you know what, I learned something from this, I should support this journalism, you can click that button and that'll automatically send money from your account to the publisher or to the author of that article. I thought those have begun to be employed by a few of the sites. Repost Us is brand new. They actually launched their website on Tuesday. And that is a new site that I'll be talking more about here shortly, that it helps transfer your content. So if you published it on your blog and you wanted to share that with somebody, through Repost Us, it automates the legal processing, it automates the paperwork, so it can get out there and get to everybody else that might be able to use that article. Go ahead, Steve.
Can I ask you a quick question about things like Flatter and Repost Us? I mean, one of the things is that everybody hopes that, if I jump on this now, it's maybe going to be the next Twitter or Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. And so many of these things start up with a lot of fanfare and then they're gone within 6 months or a year. So, I mean, how do you evaluate which one of these things you want to jump on and go with? Because every single one you do sucks some time and energy out of your life, right? And so, I mean, evaluating which of these things are worth spending time trying to...
And it's tough because they're very, very, very similar. And they're a very similar format of put in $5, then slowly dole that out over the course of your reading. And I don't have a great metric to look at what startup is going to be the next Twitter and which is going to go the way of MySpace. I don't have a good answer to that. I would encourage people to try it though. I would encourage people to give it a shot and definitely give it a chance and see how it works. And if it's not a good revenue source, if it's not taking off, if it's kind of sputtering, move on.
If I could just interject briefly, I discovered Pachinko probably a couple of years ago, and I really thought that it had some promise. It doesn't seem to have taken off in the way I thought it would, so I guess I wasn't entirely right on that. However, there still may be hope for that sort of model. There's a research team at the University of Missouri that is currently trying to do a really concerted marketing effort with the Missourian, which is the University of Missouri-Rhine newspaper, and their competitor in town, the commercial newspaper, just put up a paywall. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. So they've got a couple of professors and 4 graduate students, I think, working on seeing if this crowdfunding thing can